You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, teacher and mom. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is April 24th, 2022, and this is episode 170 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear an interview with Barry Hawkins, who spent nearly 2 decades as a lighthouse keeper in England. Barry is also a very accomplished artist. First, Michelle, has anything interesting happened on this date in lighthouse history?
Yes, Jeremy. On April 24th, 1905, Point No Point Lighthouse in Maryland was first lighted. It's a cast-iron lighthouse on top of a cylindrical cast-iron caisson. Construction began in the spring of 1902. On April 3rd, there was an accident when a pier collapsed and the iron caisson floated down the Chesapeake Bay in gale-force winds. The caisson was eventually recovered 40 miles south of the Rappahannock River. It was repaired and placed in its correct position the following year.
The federal government put the lighthouse up for auction in 2006, but the auction was suspended when it was realized that the lighthouse serves as a boundary marker for the Navy's aerial firing range and target area. The status of the lighthouse remains in limbo, and it's reported to be in poor condition. Point No Point Lighthouse in Maryland is not to be confused with Point No Point Lighthouse in Washington State, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. So, Michelle, please help me tell everyone about today's guest, Barry Hawkins.
Sure, Jeremy. Barry Hawkins worked as a lighthouse keeper for England's Trinity House from 1978 to 1996. His assignments included some of the most remote and rugged light stations in the UK. He took advantage of his spare time at the lighthouses, painting pictures of seascapes, wildlife, and other subjects.
His first 18 months of service were spent as a supernumerary keeper at various lighthouses on the west coast of England. For each of these temporary jobs, Barry would load up his painting equipment, jump on his trusty motorcycle, and set off from his home to the lighthouse in question.
The first station he was sent to was Strumblehead Lighthouse in Wales, where he arrived in a howling gale. He was later posted permanently to the notorious Wolf Rock Lighthouse, located 8 miles southwest of Land's End in Cornwall, then to Skerries Lighthouse off the northwestern tip of Wales. Barry spent a brief time at Europa Point Lighthouse in Gibraltar. His final posting was at St. Anne's Head Lighthouse off the entrance to Milford Haven Sound.
Barry is a self-taught artist. Over the years, he has created a variety of watercolors, as well as pen and ink and pencil drawings. His many awards include 2 first prizes from the Marine Society of London. He's exhibited and sold work across the UK, including at Trinity House, the Royal Society of Marine Artists at the Mall Galleries, King George's Fund for Sailors exhibitions, the General Trading Company, and Liberties of London.
Barry is also a member of the Clifton Arts Club, and he continues to paint and illustrate from his home in Bristol, where he lives with his wife and family.
I spoke with Barry recently via Zoom. Let's listen to that conversation now. I'm speaking today with Barry Hawkins, former lighthouse keeper in England and award-winning artist. Barry is at his home in Bristol, England. I'm over here across the pond in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and we're speaking through the magic of Zoom. And Barry told me this is his first Zoom call. I'm glad he's able to join me today. Thank you so much for being with me today, Barry. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an exciting prospect that I've been looking forward to for quite a while since we got in touch through the Association of Lighthouse Keepers in the UK, which with Neil Hargreaves, our president, is very popular and has many members, including those across the world.
Yes.
So anytime you feel like joining the Association of Lighthouse Keepers, you'll be most welcome.
Well, and that goes for all our listeners. I have to admit, I'm probably not an upstanding member at the moment. I have been a member in the past and have many issues of the magazine. Lamp, right, is the name of the magazine? Yeah, excellent magazine. And Neil Hargreaves, I interviewed for this podcast a while back and has been extremely helpful, put me in touch with you and also David Appleby, who I just interviewed. So It's a
Very good.
real pleasure talking to all of you. I always really enjoy this, and I'm very interested in your art as well as your lighthouse keeping. I believe your career as an artist predates your career as a lighthouse keeper, if I have that right. How did your art career begin?
The interest in art and painting began at school, in primary schools. The subject was my favorite subject, and it was carried on through secondary school as well. I did well in the O levels that we have here, and then and had a grade 1 in that. And I also, prior to the O levels, won a, which I suppose in some ways gave me a bit more of an impetus. I won an art competition for the year that I was in at school. I think it was about 1967, so about the 4th year, something like that. I forget what they call that these days, but it was run by an English tea company, Brook Bond, which you might well have heard of, and I came first in that. So these sort of encouragements were there, and I decided that I would like to go on and do fine art A levels and afterwards at uni or at college, as they called it then, art college. But unfortunately, I wasn't really allowed to. I was also quite good at science subjects and ended up going down that road and trying to become a civil engineer. I gave up with that after a while, a year at uni, and went off to teach myself some more about painting in watercolors. And that's how it all started. And I don't do quite as much now as I used to, but I'm still painting, and I still have work on show.
Well, that's great. We'll talk more about your art as well as your lighthouse keeping, but let's move on to the beginning of your lighthouse keeping career. What led you in the first place to become a lighthouse keeper?
So when I couldn't get into fine art college and I went to uni to do civil engineering, a year later, I thought I would try and change courses, but I couldn't do that. And they said I had to wait till I was 25 or live independently for 3 years if I wanted to take up fine art at a degree level or college level. So I went out to West Wales to stay with some friends. And whilst I was out there, I met a keeper who was working on Lundy South in the Bristol Channel. He lived nearby, and I met him and we talked, and that was it. I was smitten then. I decided that was what I wanted to do. It offered me a real opportunity to earn some money, and also it gave me 28 days on the lighthouses and then 28 days off, which was perfect for my artwork.
You pointed me to an interview you did online, and it was fun watching that. And one of the things I was impressed with in that interview is I think the interviewer asked, what is Trinity House? Of course, a lot of our listeners are real lighthouse buffs and are familiar with Trinity House, but I'm sure there are some listeners who aren't familiar with it. Trinity House is the Lighthouse Authority in the UK, and that's who you worked for quite a few years. But could you just maybe say a little bit more background about what is Trinity House? Sure.
It's the General Lighthouse Authority for England, Wales, the Channel Islands, and Gibraltar, and was set up by Henry VIII. He wanted to light the Thames from its mouth out in the English Channel up to the Pool of London, or up to the Tower of London. And their headquarters at the Tower Hill, just behind the Tower of London, and that is Trinity House itself. Trinity House Lighthouse Authority are the main organisation that deliver a reliable, efficient and cost-effective aids to navigation, and service also for the benefit of safety of all seafarers. They're all part of another group, such as the General Lighthouse Authority, that includes the Northern Lights Board and the Irish Lights Association. And they also belong to or are part of the Marine and Coast Guard Agency and the UK Hydrographic Office. They are also a school, or they do an awful lot with education for seafarers, and provide the support and welfare for the seafaring community as a whole. Their principal job, though, is to deliver aids to navigation and for the safety of all mariners.
Right, and that mission continues with automated lights today.
That's right.
So, like all keepers for Trinity House in England, You spent the first part of your career as a supernumerary keeper. That's not a term we use here, but it's my understanding it's kind of like being an apprentice keeper, learning the trade at various lighthouses. When you remember that period, what stands out for you?
The main thing that stood out for me, or stands out for me still to that, when I think back about that period, was the novelty, the variety of the lighthouses that I went to, from the very first to the very last, basically. I was based on the west coast of Wales, the Swansea district, and their lighthouse district stretched from North Devon, Hartland Point, including Lundy, in the Bristol Channel, and then that went up the west coast as far as St. Bees in Cumbria. And the supernumerary period was designed to visit various lighthouses, filling in for vacancies that were there through either sickness or vice or whatever, and then gain experience. And the whole period, although it was disjointed, I found very exciting. Some of the lighthouses were quite difficult to get to, and some were on land. It depended where they wanted you to go. The first one I went to was Strumble Head Lighthouse, which was outside of Fishguard on the ferry route from West Wales across to Southern Ireland, Rosslare. And I was able, because it was on the land, to motorcycle there, which was a great asset on a day off. But when you were sent out offshore to a tower rock, like the Smalls Lighthouse, which I went to quite a few times, you were incarcerated in a chimney, basically. And that could be quite difficult for some people, but I took to it, and I'm providing, and they were, the crew that you were with, the other two keepers that you were with you were all getting along, then the time went quite quickly, and it was quite exciting.
Yeah. Smalls is I believe it's considered the most isolated Trinity House lighthouse, farthest offshore. That must have been quite an experience. And you mentioned people getting along. I think the Smalls has a famous historic incident where two keepers, one keeper died and the other one tried to preserve his body. And it's, I don't know if you know that kind of macabre story. Prior to that incident, all lighthouses were double manned. The introduction of a third keeper came in after that. Mm-hmm. The keeper that survived the incident, the illness that his colleague had caught, didn't want to go ashore without a body. He could have committed him to the deep there and then, but he kept him because they had a reputation, these two keepers, for arguing a lot on the mainland, and everybody knew it in the community where they lived, which was in West Wales. And so therefore he decided to put his body in canvas and then strap him to the outer railings around the gallery. But unfortunately the weather turned so bad he didn't get help, actually, or even attract any help for quite a few weeks. And then it was months before they could get a boat out there to him. And in the process, the poor chap lost his mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that inspired was the American movie a couple of years ago called The Lighthouse. The story was quite different, but the writer-director said that story inspired him. So being a young lighthouse keeper and experiencing a place like that, what were your first impressions of the Smalls? What was that like? How small it was. to use a not genuinely to make a pun, but yes, indeed, it was. And a lot of steps, if I remember rightly, a lot of stairs to go up and down. But I was young, and I think the other thing that stuck and was probably the worst thing about living on those tower rocks was the amount of condensation that formed inside them. If he went out there in the wintertime and a warm front came through, then the lighthouse used to sweat on the inside. And it would be the same as getting condensation on the window panes in the wintertime before they had double glazing in houses. It became a bit of a nuisance, actually. It was quite damp, I remember that. And I also remember being somewhat surprised by the lack of toilet facilities. Washing was done in a bowl in the kitchen in the middle of the night when the other two keepers were in bed, using rainwater that had been collected. And the loo was the infamous bucket and chuck it variety. There had been, and there is talk that the Smalls Lighthouse was the first lighthouse to have a flushing loo on it. But when I was out there, it all rusted up solid. And so it never flushed whenever I went there. Now, in the interview I saw with you, you mentioned something about something that happened in 1979. I actually interviewed an Irish lighthouse keeper named Gerald Butler some time ago, who was stationed at the Fastnet Lighthouse in Ireland in 79 and saw up close the what is now often referred to as the Fastnet Disaster. Of course, every year they have the yacht race, one of the best known yacht races in the world, that goes, I believe, from Plymouth, England, and circles around Fastnet Lighthouse in part of the race. And there was a terrible disaster that year where a number of the yachts capsized in a squall and so forth. And now you saw some of that, I believe, some of the boats. But where were you stationed at that time?
I was on the Smalls that year, that month, August 79. And the weather was terrible at the time, but we heard about it unfolding on the radio. Yeah, 300 boats took place in that race, and they raced from Cowes out to the Fastnet via the Scillies and back. And all in all, I discovered there were 12,500 sailors taking part.
Wow.
And at the end of the disaster, there were 19 souls lost, which is quite a number, really, considering the day and age and everything. But yeah, this fierce storm came up from the southwest, and the winds were really strong. The swell was high, and the yachts, a lot of them were dismasted because they were broadside onto it. But the majority of those that had to go about it and weren't able to get into shelter down on the Cornish coast or the Scillies headed north and up through up St. George's Channel into the Irish Sea. And as you said quite rightly, Jeremy, the Smalls is quite some distance out. The furthest to Trinity House's lighthouse is out at sea. I think it's 19 nautical miles or something like that, 20 miles nearly. But anyway, whilst we were out there, we saw a few of the yachts coming by, still running before the wind and trying to get into a safe port. But that was about it. There weren't any that were that close that you could offer any assistance to them. But all you could do was watch them and hope that they carried on and report them to the Coast Guards that there was one heading north. Yes, it was quite a shock, that.
Yeah. If people are interested in hearing more about this, I would refer to them to the episode of this podcast I did with, actually, I divided it into 3 parts with Gerald Butler, but I think it was the second part where he goes into great detail about being at Fastnet Lighthouse during that. And quite a few people were rescued, I believe, by volunteer lifesavers from the area. So moving on, after your time as a supernumerary keeper, I think it was your first assignment as an assistant keeper at Wolf Rock. Do I have that right? Was that was the first place where you were an assistant keeper? And right. I believe you were at Wolf Rock for about 3 years. Similar to the Smalls. Here in this country, we refer to that type of tower sometimes as a wave-swept lighthouse or a sea-swept lighthouse. Of course, they're considered rock lighthouses.
That's right.
In England. And Wolf Rock is a granite tower several miles offshore from Cornwall in southwestern England.
That's correct.
Certainly one of the most famous of its type, I would say. How many keepers were assigned to Wolf Rock when you were there? And how many days were you on and how many days off?
As all lighthouses offshore and that, there were 3 keepers assigned to them at any one time.
Mm-hmm.
And the reliefs were split. At first, when I went out there, you did 28 days out there with the crew the other 2 keepers that you were assigned with. But that changed shortly afterwards for continuity reasons to doing 2 weeks with one crew and then 2 weeks with another crew. It was split into what was called major and minor reliefs. The minor relief being just one of the assistant keepers changing, and the major relief having the principal keeper and the junior hand changing together. The Wolf was probably the worst lighthouse that anybody would wish to be appointed to. It was, as you quite rightly say, some distance offshore. It's 8 miles off the southwest of Cornwall, not the one that everybody sees that when they go down to Land's End and looks out and thinks how wonderful and romantic it must be to live or work on that lighthouse with the rocks all around it. The Wolf is after the southwest, and it's like a little stick sticking out of the sea because it's built on the top of a volcanic outcrop, basalt, something like that. And so there's no rock around it whatsoever as such. and it was just a jetty, a landing that was built to enable the granite blocks to be transported out there and put into position to build the tower, and then for supplies to be brought out. And that jetty or landing was built around the original day marker, which was this huge conical cast iron cone that was placed on top of the rocks to act as purely what it was, a day marker. It was very much affected by the southwesterly weather. Any swell out there was amazing because the sea was coming straight in from America, and unbroken swell would be quite high. It was the highest wave when I was there had been recorded off not far from it at the Seven Stones light vessel, which was nearby. And I think if I remember rightly, it was about 30 odd feet as the highest at that time. And I'm talking about the early 80s. There probably have been higher ones since.
And in general, how did you find life at Wolf Rock?
I didn't enjoy it as much as I did at the Smalls, because the Smalls you could get out. If there was a nice day, especially in the summertime, you could go down the dog steps onto the rocks surrounding. You'd even fish. I had fished on a lovely summer's day off the Smalls with a lure and that, and caught mackerel. You couldn't do anything like that unless it was an exceptionally quiet day and get down onto the landing. And you did do that, but it was very few and far between the occasions when you could do that. It was difficult. It was the same size tower as the Smalls, but it seemed to be smaller, but it wasn't. They were sister lighthouses, same design. I don't know how to describe it. It was the weather, I think. It was dominated by the weather and the wind and the seas there. So the dampness was particularly bad. In the wintertime, it was cold. It wasn't a place that I remember with any great enthusiasm, to be quite frank. But we had our duties and our jobs to do, and if you just got along with them and the other two keepers, then everything was fine. You'd get through. It was your job. And I took that approach. I would even manage to do some painting whilst I was there, some drawing and painting. Yeah. Made a little folding table that tucked away out of the way, and up in the radio room, and that gave me an outlet. There was plenty of books, and there were books out there to read. And the TV signal was pretty good, which was remarkable, really. So it wasn't all bad. And I was there for about 2.5 years, all in all. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds interesting and maybe, as you said, pleasant, at least some of the time. But you mentioned doing some painting there. Was that the case right from the start of your lighthouse keeping career? Did you do painting at all these places?
Yes, that was the real reason one of the reasons that I joined the Lighthouse Service.
Right.
I was going to an offshore lighthouse like the Smalls and the Wolf. You were a bit restricted in size. You couldn't take a big easel and canvases and things like that, because what you took with you had to go into special plastic boxes that would fit in the boot of the helicopter, and they weren't particularly large. And food and supplies took the main priority for making up the weight load on the helicopter flight. So I was all right in a lot of ways, because I still don't much to this day paint on anything larger than A4 size paper, and a lot of it is smaller than that. I made up a box, and I could take my equipment and my watercolor box out with me, and it was safe in transport, and that's how I took paper and stuff out there, and that's how I got through it. I take sketchbooks and do a lot of sketching. Drawings of the interiors of the lighthouses was one of my favorite ones. I mean, you could take photographs, but had I got one? Yes, I just bought an SLR camera in the early 80s. So I did have the SLR, but prior to that, the 35mm ones weren't particularly good for taking, photographs inside restricted areas like the lighthouses. So I do a lot of drawings of them, quite detailed, which I've still got. And of course, they've all changed now with automation and all the equipment having been taken out. So, that's a little project I've got on the go at the moment, is to try and collate them all and put them into a book. And who knows what will happen there. But yes, it was things like that would help to pass the time. And I certainly enjoy doing painting. So would always take my paint box with me, literally.
Yeah. And wildlife, obviously, was one of your primary subjects as well, right?
Yeah, I've always loved the birds, and And migration time was always quite interesting. I remember in the summer migration, or springtime, a swallow came in and spent the night in the radio room, asleep on the back of the chair, with his head under its wing. So exhausted he must have been. They'd gone in the morning. But it was an excellent subject for a quick sketch or two.
Yeah.
But sadly, a lot of them used to fly into the structure around the lantern at nighttime and in foggy conditions, because they were attracted by the light, and then they'd hit the metalwork of the helicopter pad supports, and that was always rather sad. But it did give one a chance to make some dead studies as well, sketching.
Yeah. Well, that kind of thing happened a lot in the U.S. as well, especially with some of the taller offshore lighthouses. So as far as wildlife subjects, I've seen a number of your paintings and drawings. Puffins are in some of them, and other seabirds as well, right?
That's right. Well, when I went then to an island rock lighthouse, for instance, like the Lundy's, well, I was appointed to the Skerries after the Wolf, my second appointment, and that was off of Holyhead, Anglesey. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of small islets around it, and the seals and bird life were totally different there. Nesting colonies of Arctic terns and even roseate terns there. I remember seeing a short-eared owl used to come out quite often, looking for mice and things like that. It wasn't very far offshore. It was only a few miles offshore. So it was a totally different environment, quite the opposite, in fact, Jeremy, and very, very pleasant lighthouse to be stationed at. I wasn't fully stationed, not full time, to somewhere like Lundy South, for instance, but that would have been even better. I went there a couple of times to cover for sickness when I was in the pool of keepers that were used to fill in. And it was a lovely place, and it still is a lovely place to visit. If you ever get the chance to get out to Lundy on the local ship from Appledore, I think it goes from, then you should take it. It's a lovely place to visit.
I would love to. So you spent a little over 4 years at Skerries Lighthouse, right?
That's right. I really enjoyed the time there. It was a large dwelling for the keepers with the kitchen and that. And then a tower was attached to it with an engine room. The fog signal on it was quite an interesting one. It was a diaphone, a huge, great diaphone sat on the top, and all been ripped out now and replaced with these little electric ones. A lot of character and a lot of atmosphere on the Skerries Lighthouse, and a great place to be. I very much enjoyed the time there. And then in '87, I put in for and was lucky to get, as I was a single person, the summer appointment down to Europa Point Lighthouse in Gibraltar, where the keeper would go down to allow the families. This was a land light, and again, a totally different atmosphere, but the duties and the work were still exactly the same. But this lighthouse was on the mainland at the very tip of Gibraltar, Europa Point, looking out over the Straits of Gibraltar. And the three keepers that were down there with their families would take their holidays one after another. So a relieving keeper like myself would go down to fill the vacancy for the period of time that those keepers were taking their holidays. And they were like that was the only holiday that they would get in the year, if I remember rightly. Though I can't be too sure. They might have had, rest of us keepers just did 28 days on, 28 days off. We didn't have any holidays designated. If the duty so fell that you had to go out for a relief just before Christmas or a bank holiday, for instance, that was tough. You had to go out and do it, and the other keeper then could get ashore and enjoy the time ashore at Christmas with his family or whatever. So that was just how it was. But on a land light, they did get associated holidays because they lived there all the time, all year round.
Yeah,
children went to local schools, and so it was an opportunity to go down to Gibraltar for me to see a different aspect of lighthouse keeping.
Yes. Yeah, I guess that goes back to the days of the Imperial Lighthouse Service with Trinity House establishing lights in various parts of the world, parts of the British Empire.
Yes. Yeah. British overseas territories. There used to be one at the Falkland Islands. In fact,
Yes.
I think it's been restored. I don't know if it still operates.
I'm just curious, you mentioned the fog signal at Skerries, the diaphone horn. Did you get used to that?
It was an easier fog signal to get used to, in all honesty. It was also a gentler sound. I know it's got the horrible oomph when the diaphragm closes in the apparatus, and the compressed air is shut off, and it's that oomph that travels for miles across the sea that can be heard by a ship or somebody on lookout for it in the sailing days. But the horn itself, it wasn't quite as intense to me as the actual compressed air super typhons that were on the Smalls Lighthouse, for instance. I also think they had super typhons at Lundy as well, Lundy South Lighthouse, that I met or came across, and they were awful. I mean, just their sound. You know what it's like when one of your big articulated lorries comes up behind you and you're traveling perhaps a bit too slow in the slow lane on the motorway or the highway, and he starts giving you a toot on his horns. Ugh. It's enough to make anybody jump for their life, I always think. But you can imagine 9 of those on the Smalls Lighthouse. There are 3 banks of 3 all going off at once, and seeing the compressed air coming out the funnel part of it at the front. Oh, they were terrible. They were very effective, mine, and that's what they were there for.
Yeah, oh, definitely effective. I got to hear a diaphone horn at Suter Lighthouse in England on the East Coast.
Okay, yes, yeah.
I was there a few years ago. That was quite an experience.
If you wanted to hear one which is still working, then go to Nash Point on your travels over there in South Wales, between Port Call and Barry. Easily accessed on the land, and they've got an amazing compressor there. They've got a Reval, which has got 4 cylinders in a cross configuration on them, and for pumping up, compressing the air for the diaphragm fog signal, which is on the roof with its horn. But 2 pairs of pair of horns on that one, actually. Yeah, Nash Point Lighthouse, very good. That was one of the ones I went to as a supernumerary. Petrified me to death, because the first time I had to set the fog signal going myself was in the middle of the night, and everyone was asleep, and I always felt like, well, should I be sounding it? But I couldn't see the markers, so yes, I did. And of course, then to get all the sequence in the correct order to get it working. Anyway, I had some notes written down, but I never forget that experience.
You just made me flash back to a job I had late 80s, early 90s. I was a projectionist for a few years for you know what IMAX theaters are, the big movie theaters?
Yes, yeah, I've been to the IMAX theater. We had it in Bristol.
Yeah, I was a projectionist, actually called OmniMax. It was a dome theater in Boston, and you had to, the projector actually had a 15,000 watt xenon lamp in it, and there were it was water cooled, and there were air compressors that had to be running it to turn on all this equipment. So describing activating the horn flashed me back to
first
those
time
days.
When you come to do it with all the people waiting in anticipation.
Oh yeah, and
must have been quite an event.
Just one more story about that. Andrew Lloyd Webber came to visit us one day, and Sarah Brightman, who was the singer, who was his wife at the time.
Yes.
They were going to come to see a show and tour the projection booth. And a couple of hours before they came, the lamp, the xenon lamp, blew up, exploded inside the projector. And we just got it cleaned up and got a new lamp in just as they were arriving. It was
well done.
It was a day I'll never forget. Anyway, so you mentioned earlier you spent some time in the pool. I think it was 87 to 92. That's almost the exact years I was a OmniMax projectionist. Yeah. And so what did that mean exactly, being in the pool?
Well, redundancy was, automation was coming on quite strong then. And so redundancy was an issue for us lighthouse keepers in those years. Certainly the late 80s and into the mid 90s for me. The pool was just a shortened word for a pool reserve of keepers who were available to go wherever was needed at the time. Trinity House had stopped taking on keepers, so there weren't any supernumeraries, and a pool was created. And so when your lighthouse became automatic and demanned, that was the place most keepers ended up. And at first it was great. I ended up in it because the Skerries was being automated in 87. And whilst I went down then to Gibraltar, when I came back, the station had basically was in the process of demanning. So I didn't have a lighthouse to go back to. So I went into the pool for about 5 years, which was, I found towards the end was quite difficult. I enjoyed it at the beginning. I enjoyed it for probably the first 3 or 4 years, getting a call and then just dropping things and going off. But it was the fact you couldn't really plan very far in advance for anything. If there was an event coming up, a family event or something like that, you had to make sure that, or ask on bended knee and perhaps drop a few bribes in order to get the time off. You didn't really have the 28 days on, 28 days off, because you could go away for a few days at a drop of a hat, or you could be away for 2 weeks. In the end, it tended to depend on your attitude. And I found that if you did do that, complied with what they wanted, and then perhaps asked a few favors now and again, it worked quite well and it worked quite smoothly. And I ended up settling in towards the latter days of the pool into a vacant spot at St. Anne's Head Lighthouse in Pembrokeshire, on the entrance to Milford Haven estuary, one of the deepest harbours in the UK. They had a vacancy there, and I kept sort of saying, well, any chance of going back to St. Anne's, and they did do that. And then ultimately they gave me a permanent appointment there, which I saw out to the end of my days, and which was a lovely end to the lighthouse career that I had. It was on the mainland, Pembrokeshire National Park. A lot of people found it very barren and boring there, but there was a lovely village close by. There was some great bays you could go fishing from, beaches and that. It's a really nice spot, actually, but like I say, it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's a bit isolated.
Yeah, it's a very old light station. I was looking into it a little bit, and I think light was first established there in 1714.
Yes, and that's going back a long time.
Yeah, looking at photographs, it looks like a very beautiful place, very striking cliffs.
They are.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of bird life.
Again, it was on the migration route. There's quite a history going back to Second World War as well, with aircraft flying over from Canada that had been built over there and then being used here, obviously, during the war, and landing not far from Dale. There was a big bomber base up there. Well, let's say bomber base. I think it was Coastal Command, and protecting the sea routes up to Liverpool. Prior to that, I think it's always had a lot of traffic going in and out of Milford Haven, and they built the oil terminal and the refineries there. And then across at Castle Martin and just behind the refineries, there's a lot of army land which has been used for exercises, which are accessible to the public at certain times. Pembroke itself, the town on the other side from Milford Haven, has got a castle which goes right back to the Edward II days, or Edward III. But the whole area is quite amazing. There's some beautiful coves and beaches around there, stretching down to Tenby in the east, and then round St. David's Head, smallest cathedral in the UK, and then up north towards Fishguard and Strumble Head Lighthouse, which is where it all started for me. And
St. Anne's Head is where it ended for as far as your light keeping career. Yes. So why did that come about? Why did your lighthouse keeping career end in 1996?
It was just simply, Jeremy, last in, first out. As your name came nearer towards the top, you were the junior hand, at least senior keeper in. You were the next one to go. It just happened, and that's how it was. In the end, they given me a date in May, but I think that they didn't have a lighthouse for me or work for me to do for about 2 months before that date. So I was paid off for those 2 months as well. Yeah, it was quite a change then in lifestyle for me. A lot of the inspiration and the environment where I was living and painting, the light, the quality of the light for one thing, was all those elements were gone. I was back living in Bristol, and and things were completely different there. And that's how it's been since 96. I'm still living here in Bristol.
Yeah. So all of the lighthouses under Trinity House were automated and destaffed by, was it 98, I think was when?
I think it was, yeah, North Foreland.
Yeah, yeah. David Appleby, who I just interviewed, was one of the last crew at North Foreland. Yeah. So before we move on and just finish by talking maybe a little bit more about your art career, anything else that we haven't touched on about your lightkeeping career that springs to mind? Any memories of storms or anything else that sticks out?
The worst thing that sticks out for me was the Penley lifeboat disaster when I was on the Wolf, December 1981, on the 19th. So I'd been out on the Wolf for a while. There was a coaster. It was brand new on its maiden voyage that had set out from Rotterdam, I think it was, with a load of fertilizer on it for southeastern Ireland. In the afternoon, the situation was quite straightforward. The Union Star had lost its power, its engine stopped, and the captain had said, he'd reported it, and he'd said that he would get the engine running and that he just wanted to let the Coast Guard know because the ship was drifting. Now, we'd had a storm go through just prior to the 19th, and there was still a swell running, but the wind wasn't particularly strong. However, there was another deep depression coming in later that day. That deep depression did come in very, very rapidly, and the wind did get up, and the Coast Guards were concerned, but still the captain kept refusing to accept a tow from the local salvage tug that was in there. There's always one based around that corner of Land's End, the Wolf Rock longships and that in the winter times because of boats getting in, ships getting into problems. I think it's based at Falmouth. But anyway, the captain wouldn't, the captain of Union Star wouldn't take a line. The company had said that he wasn't to, and he's tempted to get the ship going. It got pushed closer and closer to the shore just west of Tarradoo. And the wind kept getting up, the sea was getting up, and the light was starting to go. So the helicopters came out from search and rescue, came out from the naval station, and they tried to take the crew off and whatever, but they couldn't because the wind was too strong. And by then the ship was getting too close to the cliffs. So the only other choice then was to launch the Penley lifeboat from Mousehole, which was just near to Penzance. And that one went out to Solomon Brown with 8 crew on it, and it got 4 of the passengers, and that was I think the captain's wife and the 2 cousins or 2 nieces, 2 girls. I think they got them off, and one of the crew members, and it went back for the other 4. Then the captain and the other 3, and unfortunately a huge sea came, and from what I gather, lifted the Solomon Brown up and over the Union Star, which was side on, then beam on to the cliffs and trapped. And the lifeboat got smashed to pieces basically, and then the ship did got rolled over onto it or into the same location shortly afterwards. This all happened in the night, and we could only hear the calls from the Coast Guard and to the captain of the lifeboat, but nothing was coming back. And in the morning, when the spray and the daylight came, you could see the Union Star's brand new red hull upside down, and that was the last of that. Very traumatic and disturbing night, and tragedy for the area. 8 local people lost their lives, and the 8 others from the ship, and the captain and his wife and 2 nieces. Tragic tragedy. Yeah, but that obviously sticks in my mind more than anything else. There are other smaller incidents where I remember one day seeing on a nice sunny day up off the Skerries a motorboat launch with a speedboat type thing with 2 lads in it waving as that was being pushed up on the tide and with the wind past Holyhead and between us on the Skerries Lighthouse and the mainland, and they were waving and they'd lost their power. And in that instance, it was quite a simple job to ring up the Coast Guard, and then the lifeboat came out quite quickly got a line to them and towed them back. So not all incidents like that we saw, not that they happened or we saw them very often, ended in such tragedy as the Penley lifeboat one did. But yeah, that was pretty bad that night.
Well, that last sort of thing you mentioned, I think that's why a lot of people feel that automation is a bad thing in the sense of not having keepers there, keeping an eye out all the time.
That's right. That was our job, you see.
Yeah.
Always observe for the weather and make sure that the light was operating when it needed to. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you were there if anybody else was trying to send you signals or put up rockets and whatever. Of course, it's all changed now with GPS and the accuracy of GPS, and so therefore, yeah.
Yeah. Well, lighthouses certainly aren't as central to navigation as they once were, although people would argue that they still serve a navigational role. But aside from that, do you feel that there should be people at some of these light stations?
Some of them, I think, but it's not. I don't think it would be quite so easy to get people to work on them now. Such are the conditions that and the way health and the safety has changed. Yeah, I don't think it would be feasible, to be quite frank. Such is the technology with and the reliance of technology with solar powered panels generating the electricity needed to charge the batteries and that. I think the biggest downfall for lighthouses was the invention of the halogen lamp, which didn't require anywhere near the wattage to power it, and yet could still, with those huge optic and Fresnel lenses, put out a beam that could be seen, 15, 20 miles away. Yeah. I mean, on the Bishop Rock, which I went to, and even Hartland Point, they had a biform lens of the largest order, one stacked on top of the other, with 3,500 watt lamps in them, filament lamps. I've got one here from a time expired one, and they were massive, and you can imagine the pair of them would be operating. It was just something else. It really was. And of course, it was obsolete really, even in the early 80s when I was there, and they soon got replaced by more efficient, smaller powered or smaller lamps that didn't need as much power. And then when the halogen ones came in, that was the end of it.
And now you've got LEDs in this country, and I think in your country too, LEDs in a lot of these locations that are even require even less power and less attention. And I know here our Coast Guard Ace navigation teams might visit those offshore LED lights once a year, and they pretty much run themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Just clean off the solar panels.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. So when you left Trinity House in '96, what did you do after that? Besides paint, obviously.
Yes. I learned with the local bus company that were down the road from where we're living. I had a mortgage to pay, and my wife was just starting to do child minding from home, and we had quite a large home with the 5 children, so we thought that we would develop that more, the child minding side of aspect of things. And I took a local job down in the bus company, learned to drive a bus, and was driving buses in Bristol for a number of years. The pay for it was absolutely awful compared to what I was used to, so I applied for and got various promotions until I ended up as a service manager and route manager for one of the depots here in Bristol. That was an interesting job, but it didn't allow the painting as much as I had been allowed to do it before, and the opportunities became fewer and fewer, farther and farther between. I took early retirement from the bus company in 2014, and since then I've been painting a lot more and a lot happier as well.
Do you travel to paint, to see wildlife and other subjects? I know you do a lot of sort of architectural drawings and paintings as well. And for people need to check out your artwork, and we'll talk about that in a second. But just the detail in both your wildlife, your work, and the buildings, and just whatever your subjects are, the detail is incredible.
Thank you very much.
And they're very, very beautiful. Really enjoyed looking at your art. But do you travel around, or do you mostly stay based at your home at this point?
I'm mostly based at home now. I don't travel around as much. I don't find it quite so easy to get around as much now.
Yeah.
And and I've used a lot of sketches from the past. Recently, there's still quite a wealth of those to do, but no, I don't paint now as much as I used to do, and I don't get to see the subjects as much as I used to when we were living amongst them, or even when I left the light. No, when I was moved out of West Wales and went to live near Barry. It was quite close to a canal system, the Kennet and Avon Canal. And when I was home there was a lot of inspiration on the canal scenes that I found interesting and colourful and good to paint. And people liked them, seemed to like them, and bought my pictures quite regularly. But that all changed as well then. And just adapting to the changes. I've always been happy to belong to an art club and then to exhibit with the art club once, twice, maybe three or four times a year if we're lucky. And that's what I do now. That's basically what I do now.
Yeah, and you do a lot of watercolors. You also do pen and ink and pencil sketches. Is that right? That's right. And oils now as well, because I'm not limited on the size and carrying stuff around. I've been painting larger canvases, and it's still going on. I still enjoy doing it. The detail aspect has always been there. It's something I've always enjoyed to do. But basically, it's just taking the time and I enjoy that rather than the throwing paint at blank canvas, which is what a lot of people also enjoy doing. But that's not really my cup of tea, so to speak. Yeah, I used to be fascinated by like the very early days of migration. And okay, so you'd have a dead skylark or a blackbird in front of you, but if you put the wings out, spread the wings out, and then before it started smelling too much, you've got an excellent subject there to just sit and draw. It's not the easiest of things. It's like somebody set a subject recently for weekly challenges that we did, which we have still do with our with my art club that I belong to, and one of them was hands and the difficulty with hands. We were asked to do a drawing of hands being washed. It was a fascinating subject. Who would think to do it? But when I got into doing it, and it really was so interesting. It's a bit like the architectural drawings as well. Part of the Kennet and Avon featured a couple of aqueducts by John Rennie, you might have heard of, civil engineer in this country, who helped with the building of the lighthouses in the early days, certainly the Bell Rock and the Eddystone, but the design or whatever. But his aqueducts, you sat down there and looked at them, and the curves, the beautiful curves, and the stonework on it. I mean, I used to find it an excellent subject to draw. I do sketches and take photographs and then work from those when I got back home. And that's still been basically, certainly now that I'm away from the environment that I like the best, which was the sea. That's certainly the way that I work these days now. So how can people see your art? Is there somewhere online they can go and look? Yes, I've got a website, which is www.lighthouseart.co.uk, all one word. Here in Bristol, I've got some work in a converted lightship, and it's part of the Lightship Arts Festival, which is running now until next weekend. I've got some work on show there, and hope to get into a gallery on a more permanent basis in another part of Bristol called North Street Gallery. But that's for the future. We're speaking on March 15th. The show you just mentioned at the Lightship is, you said it's this week, right? But people won't be hearing this until later, so I think that show will be past. But that's but that Lightship, is that it's an art gallery in general? Is that right? No, it's an ex-Trinity House light vessel. It was built back in the 19th century. It was built in 1885. As I believe, I was told by our ALK, the Association of Lighthouse Keepers, light vessel chappie, that it's LV 55. It was built in 1885 as a light vessel there in Bristol. Had a life until Trinity House commissioned it off. It was sold out of service in 1953 and then went to Porter's Head for scrap. Now, Porter's Head is near Avonmouth, which is the biggest port here in the southwest, just to the west of Bristol on the River Avon.
And she was taken there for scrap. The lantern and all the metalwork was removed, and then it was set fire to get rid of it, and it burnt for days, but it didn't succumb.
Yeah.
So it was left wounded and floundered and abandoned where she lay in Porter's Head. But the Cabo Cruising Club in Bristol saw the wreck and bought it for £275 in 1954. That's a year after she was sold out of Trinity House service, and then worked begging and borrowing tools and materials throughout the seasons. They gradually turned her from an empty blackened shell to a usable space. And now it's based in Bathurst Basin in Bristol, at the John Sebastian Quay, and it's their clubhouse, the Cabo Cruising Club.
Excellent.
And they've been kind enough now, as part of their festival that they're having, to allow us some space in the foredeck area inside for a small exhibition.
That's excellent. Yeah. You think that'll be happening again, maybe on a yearly basis?
Again in the future, yes.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So anything else coming up that you'd like to tell people about? Any shows or exhibits or anything?
I'm looking forward to, in the summertime, taking part in our annual open exhibition here in Bristol. That's normally near the RWA. There will be plenty of signs and that around for it, and usually takes a place on end of July, August time. Mm-hmm. But we'll have to wait and see if that can be organized. I've not heard anything about that coming off as yet.
I have two final questions for you for bonus points. All right.
Okay. So. I like bonus points.
Okay, good. Well, you've got a perfect score so far, so we'll see if you can add some bonus points. My next to last question is, do you miss life at the lighthouses?
Definitely. There were times, mind you, it wasn't all rosy. There were times when one did get fed up, like you would do in any job, but I love the work. I love the environment, and I love the keepers that you work with. And the Trinity House themselves were like working for a big family. As I say, the environment, the sea, that people would say, well, you must have been bored stiff, but every day was different. And the storms, when they came through, I still love a good storm. We live quite high up here in Bristol, and the wind can be quite strong. In fact, recently I started to take a few slates off the front roof, so I've had to have the front roof repaired and reslated, and that in order to bring that up to spec. But yeah, I really did miss it, and it was quite difficult, and I still miss the sea now, Jeremy, like nothing on earth. But that's life. You move on, and it's no good sort of moaning about it, so to speak.
My last question, I think you may have already answered, but I'll give you a chance to add something if you want to. But is there a favorite thing? What was your favorite thing about being a lighthouse keeper?
I think the favorite thing I liked about being a lighthouse keeper was the summertime and the midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning watch. And especially if you were on one of these tower rocks like the Wolf or the Smalls or the Eddystone, whatever, the Bishop, on a nice still night when everyone was asleep and the light was going around, you could climb up onto that top of that helipad, lie down on the top of the helipad and look at the stars. And I'd never seen anything like it. The beams would be going around underneath me, so the light wasn't being polluted. And then if you look down over the side of the helipad, you could see the phosphorescence in the sea slapping against and around the rocks at the base. Wonderful. And people would pay hundreds of pounds to go down to Cornwall or wherever for a summer holiday. And here I was being paid to do that and to experience that. It was great. On the other hand, there were awful days.
I'm sure.
But yeah, that was one of the favorite things about it. And the 28 days on and off, and the fact that, the way of life, I think you could say overall, the way of life. It wasn't a job as such to me. It was a way of life, and I enjoyed it.
Well, that is beautiful, and I think that's a good place to end for now. What a great memory, being in the wee hours of the morning and seeing the stars and the phosphorescence and everything. I love that.
Shooting stars going over bits of space junk. You see it all.
Wow, that sounds like a kind of heaven to me. Well, Barry Hawkins, it's been really great talking with you. The time has flown by. We've been talking for about an hour, and we could, I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about. Maybe we can do it again sometime, but it's all fascinating. I love your art, and to hear you talk about your days as a lighthouse keeper is just really, really interesting and fun. So I appreciate your time so much, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Germany. It's been a bit of an anticipated wait for this interview, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great to meet you and see you, and who knows, we might meet again in the future.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
You can see some of Barry Hawkins' artwork on his website at lighthouseart.co.uk.
I had a great time talking with Barry Hawkins. I see it as kind of a trilogy with the interviews I did with the English Lighthouse Keepers David Appleby and Neil Hargreaves.
Thanks as always to the U.S. Lighthouse Society and its affiliates and chapters. Visit uslhs.org to learn more about the tours, the passport program, preservation grants, and everything the Society offers. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider a donation to the Society to help support it.
Please help spread word of this podcast on social media. If you listen through a platform that allows you to post reviews, please rate and review us.
The Turkish writer Mehmet Murat Ildan once wrote, quote, "Are you looking for a lighthouse? Let me give you advice. When you improve your own mind, you become your very own lighthouse." End quote.
In next week's episode of Lighthearted, we'll be speaking with Jan de Boer of the Dutch Lighthouse Association. To all our faithful listeners and to our new ones, thanks for listening and
keep a good light.
Shine, let it shine.